actually the very first part of the Homeland Security part of the bill is $46.55 billion. People say toward the wall, but it's actually toward the wall, access roads, and then also technology that accompanies the road and the walls. So that money should be spent to build a lot more wall. But what we want to see is them not to just spend it willy-nilly and build a wall wherever. We want them to actually talk to the people that have the local knowledge. That would be the chief patrol agents. There's 9 of them along the southwest border. Each has their own sector. And then even a smaller unit is the patrol agent in charge, and they're in charge of the station. But these are the people that have intimate knowledge of their particular part of the border. We would want Congress to be in close communication with them to determine, okay, where does a wall make sense, and where maybe should that money be spent on something else? Obviously, the $46.55 billion can only go toward road, wall, and the technology.
Americans are capable of achieving extraordinary things when they have the freedom and opportunity to do so. This is American Potential.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the American Potential Podcast. I'm your host, David Frunk. Over the past few years, we've done several episodes talking about border security. In fact, we even traveled to the border to bring you some of those episodes. We heard from a lifelong resident of McAllen, Texas, from lawmakers, as well as folks who were seeing the border for the very first time. And we got their thoughts all about those issues and their impressions. We've even had retired Border Patrol Chief Chris Clem on to share his decades of experience and the issues that he has seen Border Patrol face. These conversations didn't just highlight the challenges, we also talked about solutions. And now with the passage of the One Big Beautiful Bill, we're finally seeing some of those ideas put into action. Today, we're going to talk through what some of those are with today's guest, Jordan Fischetti, who is the Immigration Policy Fellow at Americans for Prosperity. Jordan, welcome back.
Thanks, David.
Great. Well, I was saying to you, I'm coming live from our Albuquerque, New Mexico studio, really our office, and just because I wanted to get closer to the border. You know, get a border state that's been dealing with the border crisis over the last few years. But anyway, jumping back before the One Big Beautiful Bill, so much has just happened since President Trump's come into office. Can you remind our listeners about what some of the border security issues were like under previous administrations?
Sure. Well, first of all, it's good that you called New Mexico a border state because a lot of people forget that.
Yeah.
When they think border, they think Texas, Arizona, California. People always forget about New Mexico, but it's right there on the border. Also, one of the few states I haven't visited yet.
We'll have to get you out here, man.
Oh, yeah, you really do. You really do. So while Biden was president, we saw the worst border crisis really that we had ever seen. So just to give a little bit of a recap, there's a lot that goes into it, but just a very quick recap. Under President Obama, we averaged about 41,000 or so apprehensions per month at the border. That is apprehensions by Border Patrol. Under Trump, that number is actually around 43,000. So roughly the same. Under Biden, it was over 150,000 a month. And that includes the last year or so when things were actually a lot better at the border. There were some months where you were seeing 200, 210,000. I think the highest was 230,000. It was just absolutely ridiculously high numbers. So the numbers were going down before actually Trump ever stepped foot into office, but they've gone down a lot since he took office. And we're seeing now about 7,700 per month since February.
Yeah, that's a lot of progress. I mean, there really is. There's been a dramatic shift because we do remember back to the Biden administration how ridiculous that was. It really didn't seem like the border certainly wasn't secure. We didn't know who was coming across. I like one of the things that I've heard you say in the past, that border security is tall fences and wide gates. Maybe explain that for us.
Sure. So the tall fences, wide gates is a metaphor for border security and lawful immigration channels. The tall fences can literally mean tall fences, right? Like you need wall in strategic locations, or as Chris Clem would say, a wall works where a wall works. Mm-hmm. So a city or a highway where somebody can disappear within seconds. A wall that can slow you down 5-10 minutes could be the difference between a getaway, of which we saw about 2 million during the Biden administration, or an apprehension. And obviously, we'd prefer to have an apprehension. But a wall on its own is not going to do much unless you have the personnel who can actually apprehend people, the technology to detect the people that pass through the wall or an area where a wall is not. And on the other hand, you need the wide gates. Those are the lawful immigration channels, which is both permanent and temporary migration. I was actually a lawyer for 7 years before joining AFB.
Mm-hmm.
And if I had a dime for every time my clients, most of whom were asylum seekers, told me, look, I wanted to come here for 5, maybe 10 years, make money, return to my home country, live in a safer, wealthier part of the country. Well, I wouldn't be rich because a dime doesn't really get you much these days, but I'd have some more money. Lawful immigration channels work. We've seen it time and time again. You need that combined with adequate border security to secure the border.
Yeah, I think that I love that metaphor. I think it's really a place where we hope the country could get to. So you mentioned the wall, and obviously, the first administration when he was running for office, I mean, that was a very popular thing that President Trump talked about. They've done some building of it. How does this bill, the One Big Beautiful Bill, address the border wall?
Sure. So it's actually the very first part of the Homeland Security's part of the bill is $46.55 billion. People say toward the wall, but it's actually toward the wall, access roads, and then also technology that accompanies the road and the walls. So that money should be spent to build a lot more wall. But what we want to see is them not to just spend it willy-nilly and build a wall wherever. We want them to actually talk to the people that have the local knowledge. That would be the chief patrol agents. There's 9 of them along the southwest border. Each has their own sector. And then even a smaller unit is the patrol agent in charge, and they're in charge of a station. So these are the people that have intimate knowledge of their particular part of the border. We would want Congress to be in close communication with them to determine, okay, where does a wall make sense? And where maybe should that money be spent on something else? Obviously, the $46.55 billion can only go toward road, wall, and the technology. But I think it's important to know where it should go and in what parts of the country a road works, the wall works, where the two together are going to work, where we need a drone, where we need a camera. And these are things that Washington doesn't necessarily know, but the people who've been on the ground every day will know.
Yeah, I was fortunate to go to McAllen, Texas, and visit the border, and I found it so fascinating and so just interesting, and just kind of filled up my head with just different ideas and a lot of good knowledge. And one of the biggest takeaways was talking, I think it was the agent in charge was talking about how, a wall might be the right solution in one place, technology or drones in other places, and just a number of different solutions that depending on, like, is it a river embankment? Is it a highly populated area? Like, where are we at here to to deter people coming over illegally? And it was that was a real eye-opening thing to me, and that's what I've heard from my colleagues who have gone, that was really informative. And so, what else does this bill do, maybe with regard to technology or other solutions to enhance border security?
Yeah, so it invests billions also in new technologies, artificial intelligence, machine learning technologies, narcotics detections. And it also invests $4.1 billion in hiring new officers, both Border Patrol officers and Office of Field Operations. So Customs and Border Protection, you've got the Border Patrol, which they'll patrol between ports of entry. So I've got the exact number of ports of entry along the southern border, but there's a lot. At the ports of entry is the Office of Field Operations. So you see, like, the cars lining up in the morning.
Yeah.
They're waiting to get to a port of entry, and they would speak with an Office of Field Operations officer. Whereas the people crossing between ports of entry, they'll be apprehended, hopefully, by a Border Patrol agent. So they would invest enough money to hire about 3,000 new Border Patrol agents and about 5,000 new Office of Field Operations agents.
Yeah, I saw that there's that, I don't know if it was Border Patrol or it was ICE. We're paying big bonuses to try to bring in talent. And I imagine, I mean, obviously having the personnel and well-trained personnel to execute our border security priorities is super important. One thing that struck me when we talked to Border Patrol agents on those visits was just how low morale was. There's just a lot of folks who were really discouraged. I hope what's in the One Big Beautiful Bill and the fact that the Trump administration really is very serious about securing the border. I would hope that morale really is spiking amongst the professionals, the law enforcement professionals who have to execute it for us.
Yeah, I would hope so as well. I mean, you saw there's a crisis of confidence under the Biden administration. Suicides, actually, which were always actually pretty high compared to the average population among Border Patrol agents,
Wow.
went up during the Biden administration. People feeling like, you know what, like I signed up to do a job and now I'm doing something completely different. So they would expect, one of the things we constantly heard at the border is they'd expect to spend maybe a little bit of their time processing asylum seekers, but the vast majority of the time actually trying to prevent people from crossing illegally. But they ended up spending almost all of their time processing asylum seekers. I remember one of the agents told us that he'd come back from a shift and there would be like 10 people just waiting to be processed. They're called give ups because they literally just give themselves up to Border Patrol. Sometimes they even call an Uber to get taken to the Border Patrol station. And that's because they know, like, okay, if Border Patrol gets me, like, more likely than not, I'm going to be released.
Yeah.
So as a result, Border Patrol was spending all of its time processing these asylum seekers. And that's when those 2 million gotaways sneak by. Now, are they all bad people? No. Are some? Of course, law of large numbers.
So, in the One Big Beautiful Bill, obviously we talked about some of the different measures that were in there for border security. I mean, anything else related to the border immigration that you think was important in the One Big Beautiful Bill?
So I think, I mean, again, I think the most important part of the bill was showing that Congress can actually pass legislation. Now, what would really be the next hurdle for them is some bipartisan legislation that also addresses the wide gates, the legal immigration aspects, and by which I'm not actually talking about like legalization of undocumented. That's a whole nother issue. I'm talking about actual pathways for people to come in lawfully, whether it be permanently or temporarily. That is really what we hope to see. And I do hope that Congress can take some of the wins from this and say, okay, now let's all talk and try to figure something out. I will say, though, unfortunately, I'm not holding my breath.
Yeah, I think the border security issues, especially with how dire they were under the Biden administration, really made people just say, hey, we got to secure the border. And then, unfortunately, there's a debate now as to whether legal immigration is even a good thing. I know that our organization strongly believes that legal immigration, knowing who's coming through, having the people that we want to come to this country really is the mark of a great country that keeps it vibrant and helps our economy and our workforce and, just keeps us innovating. So how do you think that more legal immigration would help the nation and also would it help reduce illegal immigration potentially?
So I'll start with the second question. Definitely, I think it helps reduce illegal immigration. These gains that we've seen, first, I'm going to give credit where it's due. At the end of the Biden administration, and especially now at the beginning of the Trump administration, are fantastic, but they're not sustainable. If you look at Trump's first 5 months in office in 2017, we also had very low numbers of apprehensions, about 14,000 as compared to about 7,700 today. But then in 2019, we had the worst year since 2006. Ultimately, what we need is lawful channels so that the right people are not incentivized to come in the wrong way. When they are, that's when Border Patrol spends all of its time processing them for asylum, allowing bad guys to sneak by. And thankfully, throughout history, we have seen time and again that lawful channels do reduce illegal entry. And I can start back in the 50s. There was a problem even then of Mexicans coming in illegally to work. At that time, it was almost entirely in the West and almost entirely in California. It wasn't widespread like you see today. But there's still, lots of apprehensions along the border. But then the Bracero program, which allowed farmers to directly hire Mexican labor, went into effect, and border apprehensions within 2 years dropped by 1 million.
Wow.
By 1 million. And on average, there's about 200 or so thousand people per year applying for the Bracero program. So you might wonder, okay, that those two numbers don't add up. But what happened was when people saw that there's a lawful channel that they could follow, they were willing to wait in order to access that channel rather than risk crossing illegally. Unfortunately, we can't have nice things. So under pressure from labor unions, including from Cesar Chavez himself, the program was first winded down and then ended in 1964.
Hmm.
And as one would expect, illegal entry rose again. But since then, we've also had some other examples. In the 2000s, we made it easier for Mexicans to acquire H-2A visas, which were similar to the Bracero program, but unfortunately, as things go, a lot more bureaucracy. But we made it easier for them, and we saw Mexican apprehensions go down precipitously in the early 2000s and 2010s. And even in the last year, the Biden administration rolled out this program called the CHNB parole for nationals of Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela. Now, I don't think the president has lawful authority to do that. That's something that Congress should do. But unfortunately, a common theme is Congress doesn't act, the executive does act, and then the courts get involved. Putting that aside, what this program did was it offered what, at least to the immigrants themselves, appeared to be a lawful way to come on a plane rather than to actually come illegally. And I'm going to take the countries of Cuba and Nicaragua as our best examples here. With Haiti, you already saw low apprehensions even before this program, and they stayed low. Venezuela eventually got there, but it was a little bit trickier. But Cuba and Nicaragua, you saw about 35 to 40,000 apprehensions per month in late 2022. And let's take Cuba. You saw about 42,000 in December 2022. Over the next 25 months, combined, 27,000.
Wow.
So you're talking about over 40,000 per month to a little bit over 1,000 per month. Just because people saw a lawful pathway that they were willing to pay for rather than risking life, limb, and property to cross illegally. Nicaragua, it was, I think, about 35,000 in December of 2022. And over the next 25 months, it was 42,000. So about 1,700 or so per month. I mean, these are absolutely precipitous drops. As because the people, again, had a lawful channel that they were willing to take. Now, I have often said, there's unlimited footage of me blaming Biden, right? A lot of what he did was irresponsible, but I also try to give credit where it's due. This program, though, again, I think Congress needed to pass it, not the executive. This program greatly reduced illegal entry from those countries. So yes, we do see that lawful immigration reduces illegal immigration. It's also good for the country, but I want to address a common trope. And that trope is immigration is what makes us great. It's not that I would say I disagree, but I think they put the cart before the horse. American exceptionalism is what makes us great. The idea that all people are created equally with inalienable rights, able to pursue life and liberty. Unlike other countries where you were a subject, you were a member of an ethno-state, we were united by a creed. And with that creed, we excelled in a way that humans would have never deemed possible. Immigrants then saw that, and they wanted to come over here starting in the 1800s. We've had immigration here to some extent since the early 1800s. We're really picking up in the late 19th century when we were beginning to surpass England as the industrial powerhouse. So people were attracted to our greatness and in turn helped to make us, I would say, even greater. And of course, this doesn't mean that every single person who comes here, even legally, is going to make the country better. People are individuals. Some are good, some are bad. But if you want more good people, you have to incentivize them to come the right way. And also, beyond immigration, we need to keep our country as free and with attaching to the principles of the free market as much as we possibly can.
It's a great description of why we value legal immigration. I think, unfortunately, it's been so lost kind of in the discussion. I understand why, but I hope we, as a nation, we can get back to discussing why we need to reform legal immigration so we're getting the right people here. Tell me about when we saw over the last number of years, I think there was a real shift into who was coming over our border. Can you kind of characterize that at all?
Sure. So for most of our history, the vast majority of people crossing illegally were Mexican single adult males. And usually they were looking for work. That started changing around the 2010s, where you start to see an influx of people coming from Central America. Usually we're called Northern Triangle countries, El Salvador, Guatemala, Honduras. And these people, you still had a lot of single males looking for work, but you also had a lot of family units. parents and their child are often women and children, or unfortunately, sometimes, as we've seen in the news, unaccompanied children. And these people were seeking asylum. So that was the big shift in the 2010s. But then starting in the 2020s, you started to see fewer people coming from those countries, but more people coming from really all around the world. Like Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela. Those were countries where we saw increased migration in the early 2020s, and that's part of the rationale for the Cuba, Haiti, Nicaragua, Venezuela parole program. But you also saw people coming from Russia, from Ukraine, an increase in people coming from China.
Wow.
People were coming from Mauritania. I mean, they were coming from countries where Border Patrol had to figure out where they were on the map.
Yeah.
Because they had never heard of them before. So a lot of that, again, has to do with the Biden administration, but a lot also has to do with we were one of the first economies to really recover after COVID. So you have a combination of that plus the Biden administration, who, while on the campaign trail, he basically presented himself as the anti-Trump, right? Trump wants to build the wall. We'll stop it all day one. They did. Trump wants to deport everybody. We're going to legalize essentially the entire undocumented population. He introduced that bill on day one. Didn't go anywhere, right? Essentially, he opened himself up to say, hey, look, you come here and things are going to be okay. One of the things he did too, which I think people oftentimes get wrong, they get what the order actually did wrong, but the effect of the order, I think they get right. He had a moratorium on deportations on day one, struck down by the court. And that moratorium was just for people that were already here. It wasn't actually for people coming in, but if you would hear him speak about it on the campaign trail, you would never know. So people took that, right? They didn't know that it was struck down by the courts. Like they didn't know the bill didn't go anywhere, but they just heard a guy who was basically positioning himself 180 degrees to President Trump. And they said, well, you know what? The economy in the U.S. is good. We got a new guy coming in. Now's my time. And then the Biden administration, who inherited a border which wasn't honestly that great. We were on pace for almost 900,000 apprehensions in 2021 before Biden ever stepped foot into office.
Wow.
Yeah, but he turned it from like pretty bad to extremely bad really, really fast.
Yeah.
And that's when you start seeing people coming from countries that Border Patrol has never heard of.
Wow. I do want to call out one thing. The unaccompanied minors that we saw really spike there is just so scary and tragic. And I'd just like to remind our listeners, if you go back and look at our past episodes over the last 2 months, I think we had Chief Chris Clem, former Border Patrol section chief, who had detailed back into the Border Patrol for Homeland Security, actually. Department of Health and Human Services. And he was dealing directly with this awful problem of, really a lot of exploited kids and, unaccompanied minors coming over the border and really doing a lot of work on that. And his stories were just heartbreaking. I was very glad that, a man like him and the administration is really paying attention to it. But it is a scary phenomenon that we saw pop up over the last number of years. And I was glad that you kind of highlighted it. So I'd encourage all our folks to go back and watch that episode with Chief Clem.
Yeah. And one other point about unaccompanied minors, I had several clients who were unaccompanied minors. The vast majority who left one parent in their home country ended up living with another parent or maybe a like uncle or aunt. And it's just such a difficult situation for them because we hear about the hardships that they face along the way, as well as in the Biden administration, a lot of them were released into very unsafe homes, including homes of MS-13 gang members. Yet at home, they're fleeing from gang members, right?
Right.
So many times I say, look, if I stayed home, I would have died. Or the parent would say, look, if the person never came here, like they would have died in their home country. So we were willing to assume that risk. And it's like for us growing up, such a cushy lifestyle in America, it seems unimaginable that you would ever let your child cross thousands of miles in the hands of like, at best, an acquaintance, knowing that there is a decently high risk of them being exploited along the way. But when you hear about what they were escaping from their home country, it makes you think, well, maybe I would have made that same choice. And I think it's just a perspective you don't hear a lot.
Yeah, a real sense of desperation. That's so sad.
Yeah.
That those circumstances are driving people to make some of those decisions.
And that does not excuse the Biden administration from releasing them to unsafe homes. In fact, I would say it actually brings down more condemnation on that, knowing what they came from and then putting them into something like this. We've done some work with Ali Hopper, Jared Sadolsky, two human trafficking experts, both of whom have actually testified before Congress on precisely what happened with unaccompanied minors during the Biden administration. So I'd recommend people check them out. They're really, they're rock stars. They're awesome resources on this.
Oh, that's great. I'm glad they're doing that. Well, hey, as we wrap, is there anything else that you think Congress could do when it comes to border security?
So what I think that they could do, and this is going to be a little bit of shameless self-plugging, but hey, last year, January.
Hey, man, you're the guest, so why not?
I'll make it as shameless as I can. We released what's called the 4 Pillars of Border Security and Visa Reform as a framework for Congress to address the border as well as legal immigration, make America a more competitive country, leverage really what makes us great, and then keep that going. This January, we released an extended first pillar on secure border imports. So the pack is entirely devoted to how can we better secure the border imports. And the one common theme from that is something I talked about earlier, is the need to leverage local knowledge, the need to collaborate with chief patrol agents in charge, even border patrol agents on the ground to figure out what did they need, where did they need it, and how much of it do they need, rather than us just saying, okay, we're going to build a wall there, we'll build it there, maybe a road there, maybe some cameras there. Just one example from the border trip, I think that really drives this home, is we've done a border trip in Texas. We did one in Arizona. In McAllen, Texas, if you put a camera near the ground, you can maybe see for 20 feet. The Rio Grande bends. There's a lot of shrubs. It's not very effective. But in Arizona, if you put it near the ground, you could see for miles because it's just open land. What works in Texas doesn't work in Arizona. What works in San Diego doesn't necessarily work in New Mexico. And I think that's really what Congress needs to understand, is that, yes, it's the southern border. And yes, a lot of it's desert, but it's still different terrain wherever you go. And the needs are different. The people crossing over might be different. If you look actually in the past, certain nationalities were more likely to cross in certain sectors. Oh. For instance, Mexicans used to cross a lot in Tucson. Oh. And the Central Americans used to cross a lot in McAllen. So not just the topography, but the actual demographic needs might be different from sector to sector. You really need to speak to the people that have the local knowledge.
I think that's a great flag. I think, talking to local folks who have local knowledge, not just decreeing things from on high in DC, I think makes a heck of a lot of sense. And I'm glad that you're kind of beating that drum.
Thank you.
Thanks. Jordan, hey, thanks so much for coming on, sharing with our listeners what the One Big Beautiful Bill does to address border security. And as always, it's always just a joy to talk with you and appreciate the knowledge you're sharing with us.
David, it's great talking to you. Invite me to New Mexico.
Oh, don't worry. We're going to do that for sure.
Nice.
Hey, folks, if you like this episode and would like to stay connected with the podcast, be sure to like and subscribe to our channel, as well as following us on Facebook, Instagram, and YouTube. And as always, remember, liberty and freedom are easily taken for granted. Don't take it for granted. Go out there and defend freedom and liberty. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you on the next episode.
Thank you for listening to American Potential. You may listen to more stories from Americans working every day to expand freedom and opportunity in their communities by visiting AmericanPotential.com.